Alright, y'all, we are back with the seamless study. We are still in week 2. We last left off speaking about Ishmael and Isaac, how God commanded for his son Isaac to be sacrificed, and then in that moment when he was about to sacrifice him, God showed up and completely changed the status quo, the social protocol, the norm. In that day, several other religions were sacrificing children to their gods, and God showed up and said, not only do you not have to sacrifice your child, but I will provide a sacrifice for you. And so just completely was like a culture shock back then. And then, I think if I was alive back then, I would think, who wouldn't want to be a part of this religion, this Christianity, this faith in the one true God, that I could spare my children and still serve God. So it's just one aspect that shows who God is and his character, and how much he loves us. And he's not a bloodthirsty God. He's not a God that's out for that needs you to kill your child to serve him. He just wants to bless you and know that you trust him. Okay, so before we go forward to the next story about Rebecca, Esau, Jacob, I want to read a little bit more just out of this, a little excerpt about this situation with Isaac and Abraham. So it says, you know that son I promised, the one I said I was going to father many generations, the one you love? Yeah, him. Now I need you to go ahead and start walking in this direction, and then I'll tell you exactly where to go. Once you get to that spot, you're going to kill him. Well, that's sure not ideal. Let's back up a bit because this is important. What word did Genesis 22:1 use to describe what God is doing to Abraham? And it says he tested him. And the thing is, God will test us, but he will never tempt us. And there's a difference there. Satan will tempt us, but God tests us. And it says, God tested Abraham and tests us because he knows that we can and hopefully will make the choice that reflects our trust and our love for him. He both sets us up to honor him and strengthens us in obedience. Tempting someone is more like inviting them into a situation where you want them to fail. If you're watching what you eat and I start waving a candy bar in front of you, that's tempting. I'm deliberately setting you up, but God doesn't set us up. Satan does. That said, testing isn't easy. This is a great example. God basically asked Abraham to perform a human sacrifice, never condoned before. In Christianity and other religions, that was something that was practiced, but God had never asked anyone to commit a human sacrifice before. And God also seemed to be eliminating the outcome that he had promised, children coming from Isaac. Quite frankly, it seems like a pretty intense way of assessing someone's loyalty. But Abraham knows something we also need to understand, the character of God. So Abraham wakes up early, saddles his donkey, packs everything they'll need, rounds up some servants, and heads out in the direction the Lord has told him to go. And then it says, what does Abraham say in response to being called by God? This is in Genesis 22:1. And he says, here I am, he replied. It says, hear me say this. He is obedient to a situation that doesn't make sense to him because he trusts God more than what he can see with his own eyes. Let me just add that to my Pinterest board real quick because I can use the reminder. Abraham gets to the mountain and God shows him the exact place to slaughter his son. Abraham binds Isaac up, raises his knife in the air to kill him. But in that very moment, God calls to Abraham. What is God's response to him? What is Abraham's response to God saying his name in verse 11? Just a second, I lost my place. 22. So this is Genesis 22, verse 11, and he says, but the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Abraham's really good at telling God he's on board, isn't he? Have no fear. This one doesn't have a sad ending. Read what happens in Genesis 22, 12 through 14. And I just lost my place again. 22, 12 through 14. So, do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abraham looked up there in a thicket. He saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. And to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. Why? Why would a loving God ask a man to kill his own son? That leads to another question. Why would God sacrifice his only son, his only begotten son, whom he loves? This is the first time the word love is used in Scripture, and it is to describe the love a father has for his son. We're transitioning to Jesus right here, in case you didn't pick up on that. Isaac had to carry his own wood up the mountain, on his back, until he came to the place of sacrifice. Sound familiar? It should, because approximately 2,000 years later, another man would do the same. In fact, he would do it on the same mountain range. God would sacrifice his only begotten son, the son he loves, for a world of people who have made a habit of turning their backs on him. Did Abraham believe he was going to have to kill his son? Yes, based on Hebrews 11:9. Go ahead and look it up. I'll wait here. There's no shame in using the table of contents. Yes, Abraham believed it. But I also believe he put stock in the reality of the situation, which was this. He knew he served a trustworthy God. As the story ends, we see Isaac and his father coming back down the mountain together. It says, well, she ends it there. And, but you know, it's just a reminder of, how much he trusted God and how much he loved God and was willing to just follow him blindly from the time that he moved to another country, to another area, away from his family, not knowing where he was going, to something as big as possibly killing his only son. He trusted God. And it says he trusted God even when it didn't make sense to him, even when he trusts God more than what he can see with his own eyes. You know, a lot of times we don't know what's going on exactly in the moment. We don't know why we're being tested this way. We don't know why these things are happening. And God's just working us and pruning us and shaping us into who we need to be. And, you know, I think coming out of that situation, he could definitely say that he serves a faithful God, that, you know, I think it gave him such a better understanding of God's nature and his character, and, yeah. Alright, so now we're skipping over. We're on day 3 of chapter 2. This is about Rebekah, Esau, and Jacob. It says, let's fast forward a few years. Sarah has died, but Abraham, who is now older than he was in the last section, is really, really, really old, but still kicking. He wants to make sure his son Isaac has a wife before he dies, and he sends a servant to find him one. But there's the catch. Read Genesis 24, 1 through 4. Abraham was now very old, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to the senior servant in his household, the one in charge of all that he had, "Put your hand under my thigh." It's like a way that they swore back then, like a pinky promise. Not my cup of tea, but that's how they did it. I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I am living, but will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac. Okay, so the servants instructed not to find a wife in Canaan, but to go back to his home country and find a wife there. Can you picture this on a map? If not, take a glance to page 38 and find Haran. So let me show you. Oh, it's not going to let me flip it. Hold up. Okay, so here we have Canaan, which is where they're at. And up here is Haran. So it's quite the trip, as you can see. There's the Euphrates River, Babylon. So that's the trip right there. Through a providential encounter, Abraham's servant finds the woman God has chosen to be Isaac's bride. The servant receives her family's blessing and begins the trek back to Canaan. Isaac is instantly smitten with Rebekah, and she is great comfort to him as he mourns the death of his mother. Eventually, Rebekah becomes pregnant with twins. She can feel them jostling in her womb as if they are constantly fighting. When she asks the Lord why this is the case, what does he tell her? And this is in Genesis 25:23. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One will be stronger than the other, the older will serve the younger." Esau was born first. He was red-headed and very hairy. His brother is born right after him, but it seems that wasn't the order he was hoping for. Jacob is delivered with his hand holding Esau's heel, as if he was trying to hold him back. Incidentally, names always have a meaning in Scripture, and Jacob means, you guessed it, heel grabber. It also means deceiver, which he'll grow into by and by. Jacob was a mama's boy, quiet, reserved, and not really great at manly stuff. Esau, on the other hand, was a fantastic hunter and loved all things outdoorsy. One day Esau comes home from hunting and he's famished, so Jacob offered him some stew. Unfortunately for the impulsive Esau, this meal came with a high price. Read what that was in Genesis 25:29-34. Once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That is why he was also called Edom. Okay. Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." "Look, I'm about to die." A little dramatic. Esau said, "What good is a birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew, and he ate and drank, and then he got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. Okay. Let's see. So Esau gives his birthright in exchange for a bowl of beans. Not his finest moment, eh? As the firstborn, Esau received the birthright, which according to custom meant he would receive twice as much inheritance as Isaac's other children. Because Isaac was a very wealthy man, this was no small matter. But it gets worse. The firstborn also typically received a blessing as well. The blessing designated who would become the head of the household after the father died. And because Esau was the oldest, it should have gone to him. Remember sweet Mama Rebekah? She's got some plans. She wants her favorite son Jacob to get the blessing, so she concocts a plan to make that happen. She straps some goat skins on Jacob's arms, haven't we all? Cooks up a delicious meal and makes sure Jacob is dressed in Esau's clothes. Her hubby, Isaac, is in failing health and his eyesight is terrible, so she sends Jacob in to trick him. Thanks, wifey. Read Genesis 27:18 through 29 to see what happens. He went to his father and said, "My father." "Yes, my son," he answered. "Who is it?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game, so that you may give me your blessing." Isaac asked his son, "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" "The Lord gave me success," he replied. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Come near so I can touch you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not." Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau. So he proceeded to bless him. "Are you really my son Esau?" he asked. "I am," he replied. Then he said, "My son, bring me some of your game to eat, so that I may give you my blessing." Jacob brought it to him, and he ate, and he brought some wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, "Come here, my son, and kiss me." So he went to him and kissed him. When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him and said, "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you the heaven's dew and earth's richness, an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and people bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed." So, let's see. Now Jacob has the blessing instead of Esau, and it can't be taken back. Once the blessing was given, that was it. Of course, Esau is beyond furious when he finds out what's happened, and Rebekah tells Jacob he better flee before his angry brother kills him. Sometimes I feel like a rotten mother and wife, and then I think of stories like this and think to myself, well, at least you never glued fake hair on someone to take advantage of my dying spouse. Jacob, you might want to run. Now, he does, and he has a dream. What was the gist of Jacob's dream? This is Genesis 28:10 through 15. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you. I will watch over you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." So if you notice there, this is a huge blessing. And, let's see, God says, your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, spread out in all directions. All people will be blessed through you and your offspring. So, basically, what it's referring to there is Jesus. And he comes through, to skip ahead a little bit, Jacob, eventually his name is changed to Israel, which is where you have the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob has 12 sons, so each one has a tribe. And from the tribe of Judah, Jesus eventually descends. And so, he made this blessing for him that all these people that would have such a huge impact on our lives today would come through his family lineage. Here's someone that has manipulated from the first day he was born. He was grabbing at his brother's heel, trying to be first. he lies to his dad, he deceives him, and yet God saw this eagerness and persistence and what most people would see as annoying and, just disgusting, manipulative. God saw this passion in him and his just desire to be blessed, and who blessed him. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit later too, but so let's see. Does this strike you as odd? Here we have a man who's manipulated those around him since literally the day he was born, and God is promising all these amazing things are going to come from him. Remember, God made a covenant with Abraham, and he intends to see it through no matter what. So, you might remember in the last video I said, if you don't understand what's going on in Genesis 12, you have no idea what's going on in the rest of the Bible. And that is where God made a promise to Abraham. And when he made that promise, he fulfills it. And this is a part of that. He is in the family line of Abraham, and God promised to make their descendants great and to be mighty. And he's now promising this to Jacob. But that's not to say it's going to be all sunshine and roses, and this next story is a great example of that. Of all the stories in the Bible, this is the one my kids want me to read them the most. It's nothing short of an Oscar-worthy plot. And this is the one of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel. So, Jacob's heading toward Haran to find his mother's brother, Laban, in hopes that he will provide a place for him to protect him from his brother's wrath. As luck would have it, joking, he meets some men who happen to work for Laban. And as soon as they begin to speak, Laban's daughter Rachel wanders over. Well, suffice it to say, Jacob is smitten. Rachel is spectacularly beautiful, and all he can think of is marrying her. He goes to Uncle Laban and agrees to work for him for 7 years in exchange for his daughter. After 7 years, the wedding day finally comes. And possibly due to some bad lighting and a little booze, Jacob gets the surprise of his life the next morning. What does Laban do? This is in Genesis chapter 29, verses 21 through 25. Some of you may know this story. 29, 21 through 25. Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, the time is completed, and I want to make love to her." Sorry, kids, this is a little G-rated. Not G-rated. Let's see. So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob made love to her. And Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Laban replied, "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work." And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant Bilhah as his daughter Rachel as her attendant. And Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah. And he worked for Laban for another 7 years. Wow. Okay. So the trickster got tricked. Now he's married to the older, evidently less attractive sister, and not his beloved Rachel. He confronts Laban, and Laban agrees to give him Rachel in exchange for another 7 years of work. He's hopelessly in love and agrees to the terms, marrying Rachel and beginning the second half of his Work for Wives program with Laban. Awkward! Leah is, by all accounts, a wonderful woman, is basically chopped liver next to Rachel. There's no question whom his favorite is, but there's one thing that Leah has that Rachel doesn't seem to: the ability to have children. Why did God allow Leah to have children? Genesis 29:31. When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive. but Rachel remained childless. Continue reading through verse 35 and record the names of Leah's children as well as the meaning of those names. I love this part. So, Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben. For she said, "It is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me." Sorry, Leah, it doesn't work out like that. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too." So she named him Simon. Again she conceived, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." So he was named Levi. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "This time I will praise the Lord." So she named him Judah, and then she stopped having children. So I'll probably talk about this later on, way later on, but I'm going to come to it now because I just think it's amazing. So, she's like trying to get her husband's affection and attention, and she just wants to be loved like all of us. And she's thinking, well, maybe if I give him children, he'll love me. Maybe after this child, he'll love me. Maybe after this child, he'll love me. Maybe after this child, he'll love me. And through those years, her eyes are only fixed on her circumstance. She's just thinking, like, what can I do to be loved? And she tries to do that for herself, and she can't. And towards the end, she takes her focus off of herself, and she puts it on God. And she says, you know what? Despite my circumstance, despite the fact that I'm not loved, that I've never been loved truly by my husband, the fact that I wasn't even wanted, that he wanted my sister, and now I'm in this threesome marriage that I never really wanted to be a part of, that I got sold into basically from my dad, and tricked and deceived in here, like wasn't even supposed to be a part of the situation, and my life is just thrown into this situation that I don't want to be in. She takes her eyes off all of that for a moment. She surrenders it to God, and she says, you know what, despite the circumstance and the crap that I've gone through and that I'm going through right now, I'm going to praise God. And that is sacrificial praise. It's praising God when it's hard, when things are ugly, when it would be easier to look at the world and say, my life sucks, and list off all the reasons that it does, and complain, and whine, and blame God. She praises God because she knows that He alone is worthy, that He is good, that He is faithful, and that He takes care of His children, and she trusts that He will. So she names him Judah. And I believe, if you look at the life of Judah, he was not the most righteous man. He made a lot of mistakes. Towards the end of his life, he ends up sleeping with a prostitute, which is actually his daughter-in-law, disguised as a prostitute. And it ends up being this big shameful thing in front of people, and everybody finds out about it. And then we have Joseph, which was another one of Jacob's sons, that lived a very righteous life. And I think, wouldn't Jesus choose for, wouldn't God choose for Jesus to come through through Joseph's family line, who lived such a righteous life? He was mistreated by his brothers. He was thrown in a pit and sold into slavery by his brothers. And yet, he never once held resentment towards them. He loved them and he blessed them. And he praised God through all of it. And then you have Judah, who is just like pointing out other people's sins, and then realizes he has stuff in his own life, and very self-righteous, and just not the greatest example of a righteous man. And yet, God chooses for Jesus to come through Judah's family line. And I truly believe that that is only because of Leah's sacrificial praise. I think God just wanted to bless her, because when she had Judah, she said, "This time I will praise," and that is what his name meant, was praise. And she praised God even when it didn't make sense to. And I believe that is why Jesus came from his line, was because of the work of his mother, the prayers of his mother, the cry of his mother. You know, so many times we know that our families are praying for us when we're not living right, our grandparents, our parents, and sometimes it doesn't, you can't even, you know, in hindsight, you might be able to tell the blessing that they had or the effect that they had, and sometimes you don't see it. And she might have not seen it then in that moment when she chose to praise God, but yet Jesus came from her family line. So I believe that God just really appreciated that and loved her and recognized her for that praise. So at this point, Jacob's ready to move away from Laban, and he goes to ask him for permission to hit the road. It doesn't really go that well for Jacob, so he ends up fleeing with his wives and children. As they travel, Jacob receives word that someone is heading his way, and it's not someone he's super eager to bump into. Who do you think it could be? His brother Esau. He's out to get him. Jacob's terrified. He instructs the people with him to split into a couple camps in an effort to at least protect half of them. At one point, he tells his wives and children to go on ahead of him, and this is where we find a famously intriguing encounter that will forever change Jacob. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it, and I'm not even kidding. When you dig into the Word and invest in understanding it, you'll begin to feel the weight of certain stories differently, and this is one of them. Jacob, alone for a moment, encounters a stranger with whom he wrestles with until the break of day. Read it for yourselves in Genesis 32, 22 through 32. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to read it, but you can if you want to. It was Genesis 32, verses 22 through 32. And it says, God himself wrestled with Jacob, the heel-grabbing manipulator. Only God didn't leave him the way he found him, did he? God changed Jacob's name to Israel and left him with a permanent limp to remember this night. Israel, the one who contended with God and prevailed. Here's what God's saying to him. You are no longer that person you were. There's no need for you to trick and grab and twist everything you can't make sense of. You are mine. And you will have a legacy as powerful as any. Say goodbye to what you were because it's gone. You know, God's still in that business. He loves to take the broken and the weak things of the world and make them beautiful for his glory. Let's just take a moment as we close out this day and reflect on what a powerful gift this is. It says, what is one name you think of when we're talking about yourself? Maybe it's an adulterer, a liar, an addict, bitter, whatever it may be. Take a minute and think, who are you? Answer that as best as you can. And what is a name you pray could replace it? Whatever it is, remember this. Your reputation is not the same as your legacy. Spend a few minutes praying and writing in the margin about the names you want to change and the names you would rather claim as your own. I didn't intend on sharing this, but I just feel like it's a good time to. When I was in high school, I was a virgin at the time, and I think it was like my sophomore year maybe. People started calling me a whore and syphilis and different things. And it went on for about 2 years, really, like, till I graduated. And, I was a virgin, and I knew that wasn't true, but at some point I started to believe it, after hearing it for probably 200 days in a row, and, thinking that people believe this about me. I thought, well, maybe, I'm too flirty, or maybe maybe it's the way I carry myself, maybe, these things are true. And it really just sent me into a downward spiral until, I believed that about myself. I believed that I was worthless. I believed that I was ugly. I believed that I was disgusting. And I didn't really believe that anyone would ever truly love me. And after my senior year, I graduated, and, wasn't getting along with my parents. I moved out. I bounced around from friends' houses, and I began sleeping with different men. Men that I barely knew, that didn't care about me, and I was just hoping that I would be loved, that someone would love me. and I just didn't care. I didn't care about myself. I didn't care about anyone else. I was in a very dark place. And it just makes me think, how powerful our words are. The Bible says that your words have the power of life and death, and these negative words were spoken over me for years, to the point where I believed it, and I accepted that that was my fate, and that was who I was, and that was who I was going to be, and I didn't care. And I just gave myself away. I gave away every part of myself, and I had nothing left, and I was broken, and I had nothing to show for it. And, surprisingly enough, I didn't find love that way. My wounds just got deeper, and I got to a very, very dark place. And, reading this, what is one name you think about when you think about yourself? People called me crazy forever. I ended up going to a psychiatric hospital in high school because I was so depressed. And, people found out, and they said, they made up all these crazy rumors, and I know that there are people that still believe that to this day. And, part of me, it bothers me, because I'm like, I'm not that person, and I know that I'm not that person, and I never was. But yet, that's the power of your words. That's the power of a lie. My dad used to say that, just like how powerful lies are, because the thing is, the liar can die, but the lie lives on. And, he said you could say something about someone. Let's say you say someone's gay, and they're not. And the person that started that rumor can pass away, they can be gone, and people could still be repeating this rumor about this person. And I just think it's, important that we teach our children, that we teach ourselves how powerful our words are, and to be guarded, and to assess if what we're saying, is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Is it building people up, or is it tearing them down? And really just stop ourselves before we say things that might wound others for a lifetime. Think of Thumper, and he says, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And, even as an adult, that's a wise thing to remember. And now we're on day 4. This is from Jacob to Israel, which we just kind of talked about, but we'll dive in a little deeper here. It says, I so wish I could be sitting with you right now, this minute, chatting over what we've covered so far. If I were, I would make sure to get your attention, and I'd probably still have tears in my eyes at this point. I know that sounds silly, but the truth is that all of these stories, They aren't just black words on white paper. They're the backbone of the faith that we now claim as our own. These are real people God hand-selected to be a part of the lineage that would lead to the Messiah, Jesus. We just learned about the wrestling match between Jacob and God, the spectacular moment when he received a new name. It's a name of significance, to say the least, Israel. But Israel still has yet to face his brother, and he has no reason to believe this meeting will go well. Read Genesis 33, 1-4. How does Esau respond to seeing Jacob? Genesis chapter 33, verses 1-4. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau, coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 female servants. He put the female servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Can you imagine? You literally steal everything that's rightfully your brother's, and yet when he sees you, he's just happy to see you. He's happy to know that you're alive. He forgives you. He embraces you. He loves you. And I think that's just a beautiful description and just idea of Jesus and who Jesus is. And even when we've betrayed him, stabbed him in the back, done all these things, he's there with arms open wide, just wanting to love you. Crisis averted. It says, where does God tell Jacob to take his family? Genesis 35:1. God said to Jacob, go up to Bethel and settle there. Build an altar there to God who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau. Let's take ownership of our knowledge here and repeat after me. We are not afraid of the maps. Mark the route Jacob took on the map on page 53. They started in Haran, also called Paddan Aram, in Laban's territory. Then they fled and headed toward Canaan. Jacob wrestled with God in Peniel. They got safely to Shechem. God told them to go to Bethel, which is where Jacob had first received God's promise in the form of a vision. So I will show you this map really quick. Okay, so I don't know if you can, there we go. It wants us to mark the map. So they start in Haran up here. Then he flees towards Canaan over here. He's on the way here, I guess. He wrestles with God in Peniel. So he stops there and wrestles with God. Got safely to Shechem here. And then God tells them to go to Bethel. So here. So he's making a little journey. While he's... I really like that she includes the maps because you can just see, like, this was, like, not an overnight trip. This is and most of them, they're on foot or on horse or donkey, and, this is a big trip, and a lot of times God instructs them to go to different places, and it's not like moving an hour away from your hometown. It's like packing up and moving. And, sometimes they have no idea what it's going to be like there, but they just trust God. So back to Jacob and the crew. They're obeying God and heading from Bethel to Ephrath, later known as Bethlehem. These people move more than anyone I know when something dramatic happens. Read Genesis 35:16-20. Then they moved on from Bethel. While they were there, still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel began to give birth and had great difficulty.
As she was having great difficulty in childbirth, the midwife said to her, "Don't despair, for you have another son." As she breathed her last, for she was dying, she named him Benoni, but his father named him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Over her tomb, Jacob set up a pillar, and to this day the pillar marks Rachel's tomb. In this study it says, let's take a teeny break for a minute. I wonder if you're doing this work, reading the verses, and still wondering when this is going somewhere. Because as far as you can see, these are just names of people that don't mean a lick to you. Maybe not. But in the event that you do feel that way, I want to have a chit-chat before we move on. Every one of these names is important and will shape your understanding of the entire scope of Scripture. Not just that, but your understanding of Christianity today. I know it sounds like a big claim, but it's true. One day, a few weeks from now, you're going to be reading passages in the New Testament, and a huge smile is going to spread across your face because they finally make sense in context. That's Grayson talking. Hi, baby. You ready to get up? Yeah? Pinky promise. So stay tuned, do your work, it'll be worth it. Now back to business. Hopefully that pep talk geared you up for our last exercise of the day, because it's a big one. You're going to fill out the names of Jacob's, now called Israel's son. Ready? Read Genesis 35:23 through 26 and fill this in. And it's Leah's sons, and then Rachel's sons. Bilhah's son, which is Rachel's maidservant, and Zilpah's son, which is Leah's maidservant. And I'll be right back after I get Grayson up. You can go ahead and read that if you want, but I already kind of went through and did it. So we have Leah's sons, Reuben, Simon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Rachel's sons, Joseph and Benjamin. And then Leah's servant was Zilpah. She had Gad and Asher. And Rachel's servant was Bilhah. I don't know how you say that. And she had Dan and Naphtali. You know, a lot of times when I'm reading the Bible and I get to like a genealogy and it's like, this person had these children and this and that, I just kind of skip over it because I'm like, okay, I don't know these people. I don't know what's going on. I don't want to read 100 names right now that I can't pronounce. But these are really important because there's a total of 12, and these 12 are considered the 12 tribes of Israel. Kind of. I'll explain in a minute. Why? Because they are the 12 children of the man named Israel. Forgive me if that's obvious, but it wasn't always the case for me. Now stick with me for a second because this is going to get a little tricky. Each of these fellas is going to father a tribe that will turn into a plot of land. But the breakdown looks a bit different from the list above, and I want you to understand why. Levi's tribe will be the priest. They aren't going to get land because the Lord himself is considered their land, so that means only 11 get land. But wait, there's more. Remember Joseph, who was Jacob's favorite? He's not going to get land either, because it's not because he isn't special. It's because he was so special that each of his sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, will get their own land. So in a sense, he doubled up. When we take away Levi and Joseph from the mix, but add Manasseh and Ephraim, we get back to our total of 12. The lists vary a little depending on which book of the Bible you're reading, but they always work out to 12. It's not urgently important that you understand the details in the breakdown, but when you see what looks like a discrepancy from one book to another, Deuteronomy, Genesis, this is the reason for the difference. Good? Good. Next up, the golden boy, Joseph. Joseph. Okay, so you might have heard the story of Joseph and his rainbow-colored robe. But do you understand why that was important? Say no. Please say no. Because I want this to be an aha day for you. We know Joseph was Jacob's favorite, and so did everyone else, including his bitter brothers. In fairness, Joseph didn't play it down very well. He actually made a point of reminding them how special he was. His dad gave him a robe of many colors to signify his importance, and Joseph strutted around his brothers while wearing it and declaring his position in the family. Read Genesis 37, 1 through 11, and record the gist of what happened, of what Joseph told his brothers about his dreams. So, Genesis 37, what did it say? 1 through 11. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. And in this is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah, the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of the other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. They're over him, really over him. So they do what any of us would do with our dreamy, prideful sibling. They ripped off his robe and threw him into a dry well to die. Then they decided to sell him into slavery to the Ishmaelites. Where have we heard that name? Yep, these are the descendants of Ishmael, our favorite wild donkey of a man. So if you remember, Abram has Ishmael and Isaac, and Ishmael, was the son that Sarah had her maidservant conceive for her, and there was always a hostility between him and Isaac, and so now we run into them again. For dramatic effect, they slaughter a goat and dip the robe in its blood to show their father, to convince him that Joseph had been killed by wild animals. Needless to say, this moment probably didn't make it into the family scrapbook. Obviously, Jacob is devastated now that he's lost his favorite wife and his favorite son, and he goes into a period of mourning where no one can comfort him. Little does he know that God has a huge surprise for him a few years down the road. Joseph's captors take him to Egypt and sell him as a slave. His owner, Potiphar, comes to depend on Joseph, but then Potiphar's wife falsely accuses him of rape. Joseph, poor guy. He's thrown into prison for his crime that he didn't commit, where he interprets dreams for prisoners and eventually for Pharaoh. Joseph lands in good graces of the ruler. It's a roller coaster for sure, but it ends with Joseph as second in command over all of Egypt. The dream Joseph interpreted for Pharaoh involved telling him that Egypt was going to have plenty of food for the next 7 years, followed by 7 years of famine. He warned Pharaoh to stock up while they could, and Pharaoh listened. When the famine came, Egypt had more food than they needed, but the surrounding areas were suffering terribly, and this is where the story takes a dramatic turn. So who shows up in Egypt? The boys head back home and tell Israel they're going to need to bring... Okay, so the boys, his brothers, they come to Egypt in search of food, and not all of them. Benjamin's missing from the crew because Benjamin was also one of Rachel's children, and since Israel had already lost Rachel and Joseph, two of his favorite people, He wanted to protect the one thing that he had left of Rachel, which was Benjamin, so he kept him at home. He was the youngest sibling. So, when they get there, they tell him that they have this, they tell Joseph, which they don't recognize him at first, they tell him that, he's like, oh, is this all of your siblings? They're like, oh no, we have one back at home. And he's like, well, bring him so that, I know that you're telling the truth, or whatever, but he doesn't tell them who he is. Up to this point, the brothers really don't understand why they've been brought into the palace and treated so well. Hold up. Okay. Hang on. The boys head back home and tell Israel they're going to need to bring Ben back to Egypt with them. Daddy's not happy about it, but concedes and sends them on their way. And then it says, who does Joseph ask them about in Genesis 43:26 through 31? Let me just get my paper over here. Let's see. Jacob, Israel, their dad. So he asks about their dad, and what brings Joseph to tears is seeing Benjamin. Up to this point, the brothers don't really understand why they're brought into the palace and treated so well. I imagine them shooting one another glances while they feast, wondering what brought this amazing opportunity. Eventually, Joseph reveals himself to them. Read all of Genesis 45 for yourself because it's spectacular on so many levels. Make any notes that come to mind when you read this. Did anything surprise you, inspire you, give you any new insights of the story? So, let's see. I have... let me see if I wrote anything there. Oh, okay. So in Genesis 45, verse 5, he tells the brothers not to be upset about selling him into slavery. It was to save lives. Talk about grace. Not only did he forgive them, he asked that they not be upset with themselves. Wow. God sent me ahead of you to save your lives. This foreshadows Jesus. Joseph lived a righteous life, was persecuted, and still forgave and loved. And then I wrote like a song lyric that says, "You take what the enemy meant for evil, and you turned it for good." He tells his dad and his family to come live close to him so he can take care of them. Pharaoh promised Joseph's family the best land in Egypt. Take your wives and children, forget about your things, because the best in Egypt will be yours. Joseph gave each of them new clothing. He gave Benjamin 300 shekels of silver and 5 new pairs of clothing, 10 male and 10 female donkeys, grain, bread, and things for the journey, and a gift to Israel. He told his brothers not to argue along the way. And it never says that the brothers admitted that what they did to Joseph, just that when they saw the gift. Sorry, I got a phone call and I think it cut off there at the end. But back to Seamless, it says, I love how tender Joseph is in these paragraphs, and the way you can see the little boy in him. He wants to see his dad and reassure his brothers that all is well and God has had his way. He doesn't waste a moment by letting them stew in regret. He simply says that God prevailed over their evil intentions. Well, that'll preach. Jacob and Joseph are reunited, and Pharaoh blesses Jacob. They are given the best of the land and ensured plenty of food and goodness, and all is well. And then it says Jacob's dying request is to bury him where his fathers are buried, and then he worships God, which is the same place Abraham and Sarah were buried, Isaac and Rebekah, and now him and Leah, in a cave. Or wait, yeah, he's buried in a cave. So it says, Egypt is not his homeland, Canaan is. In Genesis 49, Jacob blesses all of his sons and prophesies what their lives and graces will hold, and legacies will hold. He wants to go home, Abraham's home, Sarah's home, Isaac and Rebekah's home, Leah's home. He wants to be gathered with his people in death, and Joseph honors his request. He and all his brothers carry the body of their father and lay him to rest in the same cave as his ancestors. Now that Jacob is gone, and Joseph's brothers wonder if he'll turn his back on them or worse. Read Genesis 50:19 through 21 to find out. The book of Genesis ends with the death of Joseph. It says, before we end this lesson, take a minute for an overall recap. See how much you can fill in by memory, and then look through your notes to see the ones you can't recall. So here's the chart that it's telling us to do. Hold up one second. Okay, let me get mine out of my notes. Okay. So I kind of drew the same thing over here. So we have Abraham and Sarah. Then we have Isaac and Rebekah, Esau, Jacob and Leah, Leah and Rachel, and then their maidservants, their children. The one that's missing here, we've got Simon, Reuben, Issachar, Judah, Zebulun, and then Manasseh is missing here, Dinah, let's see, which one, what's the other one, Dan and Naphtali, Zebulun, Ephraim. So yeah, there's kind of their family tree and all the tribes of Israel there. Okay, that was the end of week 2. Now that we understand the promise that started with Abraham, went down through Jacob, who then became Israel, his 12 children, the sons of Israel, the tribes of Israel that are now going to be talked about throughout the rest of the Bible. I hope that'll give you a better understanding for the next weeks to come. And I hope you all enjoyed today, and I hope you all have a great week.